sunshine.
Ladies and gentlemen, and Greg, how are y'all?
That was completely appropriate. No, we feel very close. I mean,
Shauna, we're not waiting for anybody else, are we? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming out today. As you know, we had a Restore Louisiana Task Force meeting that was scheduled in Livingston Parish today at 1 p.m. And because of the threat of inclement weather with freezing precipitation and with some schools in the area and the state government shutting down at noon, that meeting was canceled. But I did think it was appropriate to go ahead and have a press conference so that much of the information that you would have gleaned from that meeting we can go ahead and present to you now. And I want to be very clear that canceling the meeting today will not result in any delay on any part of the recovery process that we're undertaking. And in fact, today we have submitted to the federal government our final action plan for the first $438 million to housing and urban development. I would also like this opportunity to discuss with our citizens our proposed plan for the additional $1.2 billion of approved funds. And I'm certainly grateful for the work of the Restore Louisiana Task Force, and I'm joined today by the co-chairs of that task force, Ms. Jackie Vines and Mr. Jimmy Durbin. I want to thank you all for your hard work. And later, when I'm finished with the prepared remarks, I have Pat Forbes, who runs the Office of Community Development here, in case you have any specific questions that might require his attention. But the Restore Louisiana Task Force members have certainly worked very hard to make sure that they're guiding our state through what we know is a lengthy recovery and rebuilding process. And there is nothing easy about bouncing back from such a devastating national disaster. I know that Louisiana is strong, Louisiana is proud, Louisiana is resilient, and we're certainly going to rebuild, and we're going to recover, and we will thrive like never before. But we do have challenges, and acknowledging those challenges and working hard to overcome them is the best path forward. Since the August flood, I have visited Washington, D.C. on 5 separate occasions to advocate for flood recovery dollars, and I've expressed the needs of our state to President Obama, to President-elect Trump, and to congressional leaders. And I have enjoyed working with the entire congressional delegation throughout the process. And they have worked very well with me and with the administration. And certainly, we are grateful for the money that we've been allocated so far. But make no mistake, there are still many needs left to meet, and we will return to Congress very shortly, asking for Congress to fully fund our recovery efforts and in accordance with the needs that we can demonstrate, and also in accordance with the way our requests for funding contrast or compare, I guess I should say, with recovery funding that's been given out in other similar disasters. The plan that we're presenting today to the task force for the additional $1.2 billion approved for Louisiana extends beyond the elderly and disabled, low to moderate income population who we are helping with the first $438 million that Congress approved for Louisiana. This plan offers some measure of help to everyone who had a major or severe damage from the floods in March and August and who was not carrying flood insurance. We will include some element of reimbursement for homeowners who have already completed their rebuilding if they are eligible under that program. There are some hard realities that we all need to recognize in this plan, and that is mainly due to the fact that Congress has not yet appropriated enough money to fully address the extent of recovery that we need here in Louisiana. While $1.6 billion sounds like a lot of money, and it certainly is a lot of money, it is still $1 billion short of what we need for housing recovery alone. And we're not in a position to use the full 1.6 for housing recovery because there are other very pressing needs as well. That's why we're working so quickly, and that's why we need to go back to Washington and bring home another $2 billion under the new Congress. The help approved for Louisiana so far is less than many folks will need, and there is no assistance for people who carried flood insurance, even though we recognize that many of them will still have unmet needs, and this is just a very unfortunate reality. We know that this means many people will have to use savings or get loans in order to receive their grants or to complete their home repairs. And this is why we continue working daily, very hard with Congress and with the new administration in the White House to bring home additional recovery money. And we're going to continue to work with bankers and other lending institutions to maximize the extent to which funds are available. But again, the sad reality is we will still have homeowners who cannot rebuild because they can't access the additional funds that will be necessary for them to do so. No funds are in this budget for the plan that we're talking about today for infrastructure improvements of any kind, including paying the estimated $93 million in match for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program for the August floods. And I will point out that this is the first natural disaster to receive recovery funding of this type in recent memory where Congress has not appropriated any dollars for infrastructure enhancements. And we believe that they intend to do so and that they will do so, and it's another reason why we'll be returning to Congress. But what this means is there will be no work to implement the kind of flood protection measures that will reduce the damages from future floods and to protect the investments that we're going to make as we rebuild our communities now, unless we get another congressional appropriation. Prevention is crucial to ensuring we don't end up right back in the same place again. And we've made this request to Congress from the outset, and we will continue to do so. The task force and the public can know that we will continue to press Congress for this help, and I will continue to work with our congressional delegation to make sure we bring that assistance home. The only funds allocated to infrastructure right now in this plan are to cover the local match for all FEMA public assistance, which most of our local governments, fire districts, school districts, and all nonprofits can ill afford to cover. 1 in 4 homes impacted by the March and August floods were renters. So you will see an increase in the amount of funds allocated for affordable rental and homelessness prevention in this plan as well. And please note, too, that we're doing everything we can at the state level to drive costs of delivery down from what other programs have spent in the past so that we can invest as much money as possible in the actual recovery. And I have made requests of the federal government to remove needless, burdensome, time-consuming, and overly costly federal regulations that would require higher costs on our end. And I have asked congressional delegation to work with me to do the same. First, for the administrative cost of this plan alone, we are planning to keep the cost down to 4% of the money, below the HUD allowed amount of 5%. And I've instructed Pat Forbes to continue to work to try to reduce that below 4% if possible. We expect that the amount of this federal money that the contractors will use to actually run and operate the program will make up only 15%. That's not 15% profit. That's 15% that includes profit, but also the cost of labor in delivering this program. And that's certainly going to include many Louisiana workers that it will take to get the funds out to the homeowners. Program delivery costs in the Northeast, for example, after Superstorm Sandy ran as high as 45%. We know that every penny we save in administrative costs is a penny that can go toward rebuilding a home or helping a business stay afloat or reimbursing a homeowner who is already rebuilt. So we will be doing everything possible to drive those numbers even lower if possible. Secondly, and very important, the speed at which we are unrolling these 2 phases of help, while never as quick as we would like, and certainly not as quick as the folks who've been impacted by these storms would want them to be, is nevertheless very fast compared to the history of post-storm assistance. Not only did we receive the first appropriation less than 2 months after the water receded in August, our state put our proposed action plan out for public comment only 3 weeks after HUD published the required guidelines that set forth how the money had to be spent. This afternoon, based on the task force's previous recommendations, we submitted the state's first action plan to HUD, only 3 days after the required public comment period ended. and more than a month ahead of the federal deadline for the state to submit its plan. And that's a federal deadline that other states who received appropriations for this same storm not the same storm, but in the same appropriation from Congress, have already asked the federal government to have that deadline extended. What's more, it was only a little less than 2 weeks ago that we received the official announcement from HUD that $1.2 billion was the next amount coming to Louisiana for flood recovery out of the continuing resolution that was passed last month. And we are already developing this next action plan for that $1.2 billion in preparation for HUD's publication of the required guidelines in the Federal Register. And I cannot stress this enough. Even with a concentrated effort to operate as quickly and efficiently as we possibly can, we are still $2 billion short of what we need for a full, robust recovery. That's why I'll be returning to Congress again next month to continue working with our congressional delegation and congressional leaders and members of the Trump administration so that we can get the money we need for a full recovery for our citizens and for a safer, more resilient future for our state. And I'm asking for everyone's help and support and your continued insistence that the people of Louisiana receive not only the assistance that it needs, but the facts on this critical path forward. Contrary to what you might have heard publicized, our state is not slowing down the federal funding process in any way. For a recovery plan of this nature, this is actually the fastest the state has ever worked in meeting the federal requirements to bring this type of recovery funding home. The danger of misrepresenting Louisiana's role in the process, suggesting either that Louisiana doesn't have a plan or has been dilatory in any way, could jeopardize the next appropriation that we know we desperately need. It's also ridiculous and unhelpful to suggest that Louisiana could have advanced the funding for housing recovery and used the continuing resolution appropriation from Congress as reimbursement. In the last year, as you well know, our state dealt with the largest budget deficit in our history. We have ongoing budget challenges and the attendant serious cash flow problems as well. And this year, in fact, just last month, $313 million had to be cut in order to alleviate the shortfall that was realized when our books were closed at the end of last fiscal year. And the Revenue Estimating Conference is going to meet next week and is likely to recognize a shortfall in the current mid-year by as much as $300 million. So to suggest that we had the money at the state of Louisiana to advance in order to implement these programs and then use the appropriations as reimbursement is just not a realistic solution. And such false assertions by people who surely know better could serve to undermine confidence, public confidence, both in Louisiana and perhaps in Washington, D.C., in the recovery. And that would be unfortunate. So while we remain $2 billion short of our federal assistance recovery needs, and we are far from finished in fighting for our fair share of help so that we can get people's lives back on track here in Louisiana. I did personally speak with President-elect Trump about our needs. He agreed to meet shortly after his inauguration, and in his own words, he said that he loves the state of Louisiana and the people, and I am confident that he's going to be ready to help. We need to make sure that everyone in Congress hears the truth about what the situation is in Louisiana. Together, we in Louisiana are setting new standards in the pace of federal disaster recovery assistance, although it's not as quick as we would like it to be, and it's not as quick as the affected population would want it to be either, and I'm certainly aware of that. We are also going to lead the way in improving how our government helps citizens and businesses stand back up and rebuild stronger after disasters. And again, I want to sincerely thank the task force members, all of them. I do have with me, as I mentioned before, the two co-chairs for their participation, their hard work, and their efforts in traveling the state, receiving public input, and letting us know the smartest way that we can move forward as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. By working together, we are going to move Louisiana forward into a stronger and brighter future. And with that, the longest prepared remarks I've ever had for a press conference. I'm going to grab a sip of water and ask you if you have any questions.
Task force remain intact and continue meeting and
Yes, yes. There's some additional work that they need to do in the short term, but obviously, until the recovery is over, that there will be a need for the Recovery Task Force, and they will continue to meet.
When is your next trip to DC?
My next trip to DC, actually, I'm going twice I believe it's twice in February. Once around the Washington Mardi Gras time, where I will spend some time meeting with congressional leaders and members in the administration. But also, next month, I will go up for the National Governors Association meeting and carve out some time there as well to go back either to the administration, to Congress, or to both.
It's during one of those two visits you hope to actually meet with the president-elect.
Yes. I hope to meet with him. What he asked me to do was call after the 20th and schedule a meeting. I suspect he's going to be very busy, and the first conversation may be by phone, for example, but we are going to be asking for a meeting.
When you last met with the delegation, which I believe was December 20th,
Yeah.
did the ones that were present universally agree to your figure that 2 billion more was needed? Do they agree with that?
Well, I don't know that, to be very honest, in my memory, I don't know that we ever asked them whether they agreed with that number on that day. I can tell you we haven't asked for anything that we haven't shown to our congressional delegation in advance and received their support for the request. Because I don't want to go to Congress, obviously, and ask for more money than my delegation is going to be there asking for. So I believe we're on the same sheet of music there.
Governor, why do you think you hadn't been always on the same page as far as the timing of this rollout of the plan, the money in the pipeline? I can tell that obviously, clearly you're sensitive to that, worried that that might harm future efforts. Why do you think that is?
You know, I'm not sure why those statements would be made, either that we've been dilatory in advancing a plan, or that we don't have a good enough plan, or that we should have advanced the money from some account that I obviously don't know anything about here in Louisiana, and then use the appropriation as reimbursement. Those things are irresponsible. They're not helpful. And so as to why those are being advanced, you would have to ask the folks who are making those statements.
Why did you decide, given the small balance that we have now, not to put any towards infrastructure? Is that a decision you made, or I was a little confused by what you were saying, whether it's the Congress
Well, first of all, Congress did not allocate any money for infrastructure. And in every disaster of this nature in recent history, when they appropriate money for community development block grant to recover communities, they typically protect that investment with infrastructure enhancements to make sure that we don't invest money to rebuild homes and businesses only to have them flood again in this case. The other reason, so they didn't appropriate money for that, and the single biggest need that we have, and we've said this all along, is housing. So we simply just don't have the money available to go towards infrastructure, other than the hazard mitigation grant program, which we are going to have, that comes with a 25% match.
Okay, so if you, when you go and lobby for more money, will you be lobbying specifically for money to support infrastructure projects?
No, I'm going to lobby for the rest of the money that we need, which includes infrastructure enhancements, but it also includes more money for agriculture and business losses. It includes more money for housing. It's all of that.
Governor, you talked about the budget situation in REC in the next year.
Mm.
There seems to have been more of a drumbeat since we got back from the holidays about the expectation that a special session will be needed to deal with the budget cuts. Are you, do you see a special session as inevitable now, or kind of where do you sit on the need for a special?
Well, I don't view it as inevitable, and certainly a final decision is not going to be made until REC meets. And as you know, the Revenue Estimating Conference meets, and they will peg a number that we are short in the current mid-year, as a budget deficit. And then when the Joint Legislative Committee on the Budget meets subsequent to that and adopts that number, that's what triggers our timeline to fix the deficit. Depending on how big that number is, will determine whether a special session is needed, because the larger the number is, the more likely the special session will be, simply because the larger the number, the broader the spectrum of the budget you would need to open up for reductions. Otherwise, you concentrate all of those cuts on just a few areas, and they are just extremely painful, more painful than we can bear. And so that's what makes the likelihood of a special session.
Is there a ballpark figure that in your mind would trigger the need to spread it out more than without a special?
Well, I haven't thought about it that way. I've been told to expect up to $300 million shortfall, assuming, and I hope we would, that we apply the $119 million that's available from the Budget Stabilization Fund. That still leaves approximately $180 million in cuts. That number is so large that it would necessitate a special session.
So you think if the figure is 300 million, that in your mind you would need a special session?
Correct.
Because when I spoke to the House Speaker, he was not necessarily in agreement with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Governor, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the priorities for the flood recovery. I know that there are some things that were talked about, like mortgage assistance, first-time home buyer programs that are not able to be funded right now. What are those types of programs, things that you would like to see done if the state gets more money? And how, I guess, how does that play into the recovery, prioritizing certain regions?
Yeah, well, first of all, there are a lot of things that we would like to see happen, whether it comes through a traditional appropriation, for example, a community development block grant, or whether it comes through a separate bill in Congress for tax relief, for example. And I know that before he left Congress, we had a Congressman Bustani who was advancing a package that we were very supportive of, and we talked to the congressional delegation to see if one of them would continue to advance in that direction in the new Congress with a bill. But obviously, we have the necessary component parts to our plan. What we don't have are the dollars necessary to fully implement the plan. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things that we would like to do more robustly. But we believe that the major parts of what we're trying to do are in place, and thanks to the good work done by the task force and by the Office of Community Development.
Can you speak a little bit more to the reimbursement for
Yeah.
Cities and such that have had to take on this FEMA match rate? Was that something that they had specifically
Yeah.
lobbied you for?
Oh, very, very hard. And you should remember that for the March flood, the match is 25%. It went down to 10% in the August flood. And so we have all of these political subdivisions that now have to come up with these match dollars. At the same time, their ad valorem tax revenue is declining because the assessments that went out in December largely reflected the damaged structures, the homes and businesses, and so will bring in less revenue. And their expenses went up, their revenue went down, their ability, their match requirements was just not there. And that's true across the state for both the March and August floods. And so out of this $1.2 billion, we are going to carve out what is required for that match. Yes?
This is probably premature, I'm going to phrase it that way. With the current situation outside that we're watching across Louisiana, is there any thoughts as to a state of emergency or anything like that?
Yeah, we haven't reached that point. And typically, you know, we've gone through this exercise a number of times in the last several years. And roads are closed on a case-by-case basis, and schools are closed, and I expect that this won't be unlike the others. Yes, ma'am.
I wanted to go back to the major deficit.
Well, I have not heard any opposition to it. I did have an opportunity this week to speak with over 20 senators, none of whom expressed any opposition to it. I don't know how, given the $550 million that was cut by me before we got to the $313 million last week, and then you put this $300 million on top of it, that we would not use the budget stabilization form for its intended purpose at a time when it's obviously critically important. And again, that would, assuming, and we don't know this till they meet, but assuming that the mid-year shortfall is $300 million, that gets the actual cut or the problem that has to be resolved to $180 million. And so I haven't been told of any opposition, and certainly we've been talking to the legislative leadership in the House and the Senate for a couple of months now about using the rainy day in this instance, and I've had those conversations with all of the leadership, and I've not been told that it would be a problem.
One last question.
Yes?
Given the role that, kind of springboarding off the budget, that Medicaid expansion and whatnot has played in basically helping hold the budget together last year, what is your take on, for instance, Cassidy's plan for the grants, block grants instead of Medicaid expansion?
Yeah.
And other parts of that Obamacare replacement?
Well, I don't think we know enough about his plan. If the plan is a reasonable facsimile of what we've got, then certainly I can work with him on that. If it's a block grant that gives me the flexibility to implement huge cuts, that's not something I'm in favor of. The Medicaid expansion saved our state $184 million state general fund this year, almost 10% of that historic budget deficit. We now have about 370,000 working poor people in Louisiana with health insurance who didn't have it before July 1st of 2016. We have hundreds of people right now who have received diagnostic evaluations that they wouldn't have had otherwise. We've got over 100 people being treated for cancers that they did not know they had before they had Medicaid expansion. Our medical providers, bottom line, if they're engaged in the Medicaid business, is much better than it was before Medicaid expansion. And there have been an awful lot of people hired in Louisiana to work in the healthcare sector because of the influx of these federal dollars to deliver healthcare. The Medicaid expansion has been a huge success in Louisiana, and there is no debate about that among reasoned, enlightened people. And so I expect to work closely with Senator Cassidy, and I know that he is very familiar with what's going on here in Louisiana, and I'm optimistic that if he's working on the replacement for Obamacare, and that replacement includes the Medicaid expansion component of the Affordable Care Act, that he will work to make sure that we can continue what we're doing now. Thank you all very much. Be very careful going home.